This is the story of the greatest identity theft in human history, not of a person but of an entire pantheon of gods. A cultural heist so audacious, so complete, that it has successfully fooled the world for over 2,000 years. The victims were the gods of Olympus, the powerful, passionate, and deeply flawed deities of ancient Greece. The culprit? An empire that needed their power but feared their spirit. Rome. You've been told a simple lie your whole life. You've been told that Jupiter is just the Roman name for Zeus, that Mars is Ares, that Venus is Aphrodite. A simple act of translation like saying hello instead of hola. This is not just wrong. It's a profound misunderstanding of one of the most brilliant acts of psychological warfare ever committed. Rome didn't just rename the Greek gods. They kidnapped them. They interrogated them. They broke them down and rebuilt them in their own image, twisting their identities to serve a new and ruthless imperial agenda. They performed a soul transplant on a cosmic scale, creating a new breed of gods, colder, more disciplined, and perfectly engineered to rule the world. But why? Why did the Romans go to such extreme lengths to not just copy, but fundamentally corrupt these divine beings? What were they so terrified of in the original Greek myths that they had to systematically erase it? The answer is a secret about power, a secret about control, and it's hidden in the very foundation of Rome itself. And by the end of this, you will never look at a Roman statue the same way again. To understand this heist, you have to understand the scene of the crime. Imagine the ancient Mediterranean. Greece, the cultural superstar, is fading. Its golden age of philosophy, democracy, and drama is becoming a memory. But its stories, its myths, its gods, they are the most powerful brand in the world. They are cultural wildfire. And then there's Rome, the new power on the block. A gritty, pragmatic, militaristic state built on discipline and conquest. Rome had an army that could conquer the world, but it had an inferiority complex the size of the Mediterranean. They had engineering, they had law, but they lacked a soul. They lacked a grand, epic story that could justify their ambition. They needed legitimacy. They needed a mythology that felt as ancient and profound as Greece's. You can't just invent gods out of thin air and expect people to worship them. So the Romans did what they did best, they conquered. But this wasn't a conquest of swords and shields. It was a conquest of the imagination. They looked at the Greek pantheon and saw it not as a religion, but as a priceless asset to be acquired. This was the ultimate corporate takeover. But Rome knew they couldn't just slap a new Roman logo on the Greek product. The Greek gods were a public relations nightmare for an empire built on order. They were chaotic, narcissistic, driven by lust, jealousy, and petty grudges. They were far too human, far too messy. So Rome initiated a hostile rebranding campaign on a divine scale. Let's start at the top, with the king of the gods. The Greeks gave us Zeus. Think of him. The lord of the sky, yes, but also a serial predator. A paranoid ruler who overthrew his own father and feared his children would do the same to him. He was defined by his uncontrollable passions. His myths are a catalog of cosmic soap operas, affairs, betrayals, and temper tantrums that shook the foundations of the world. He was a force of nature, as unpredictable and terrifying as a lightning storm, a being of immense power, but one who was fundamentally a slave to his own impulses. Rome looked at this divine drama king and said, absolutely not. An empire of law and order cannot have a lawless god at its head. So they didn't just rename him Jupiter. They stripped Zeus of his personality. They performed a character assassination and replaced him with the corporate CEO. Jupiter, specifically Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the best and greatest, was not a god of passion. He was a god of state. He was the divine embodiment of Roman authority, justice, and piety. The wild, scandalous stories of Zeus's affairs were sanitized, downplayed, or simply ignored. The focus shifted from his personal dramas to his public duties. Jupiter was stoic. He was patriarchal. He was the celestial guarantor of oaths, treaties, and the sanctity of the Roman Empire. While Zeus ruled through fear and charisma, Jupiter reigned through law and gravitas. They took a flawed, fascinating character and turned him into a symbol, a divine rubber stamp for Roman ambition. The message to the Roman citizen was clear. Your personal desires are irrelevant. Your duty to the state is all that matters, just as it is for Jupiter, our greatest god. But if the transformation of Zeus into Jupiter was a calculated corporate restructuring, what they did to the god of war was a complete ideological revolution. This is where the Roman agenda becomes terrifyingly clear. To the Greeks, the god of war was Ares, and the Greeks hated Ares. They were terrified of him. He wasn't the god of noble combat or strategic victory. He was the god of bloodlust, of the mindless, brutal, chaotic slaughter of the battlefield. He was a butcher. In the stories, he's often portrayed as a coward, a bully who screams and runs home to his father Zeus when he gets a minor wound. The other gods mock him. Athena, the goddess of strategy, consistently outwits and humiliates him. Ares represented everything the intellectually minded Greeks feared and despised about war: its savagery, its pointlessness, its inhumanity. Rome, a civilization whose entire existence was predicated on constant, relentless military expansion, could not have a god of war who was a pathetic, hated brute. It was philosophically impossible, so they didn't just rename him Mars. They made him the father of their nation. Mars became one of the most important, most revered gods in their entire pantheon. According to their foundation myth, Mars was the divine father of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome itself. He wasn't the god of mindless slaughter. He was the divine patron of the Roman legions. He represented military glory, disciplined courage, and the sacred duty of expanding the empire. War under Mars wasn't a chaotic tragedy. It was a civilizing mission, a righteous act ordained by the gods. They took the most detested member of the Greek Olympus and placed him at the very heart of their national identity. Think about the sheer genius of this psychological maneuver. By transforming the hated Ares into the revered Mars, the Romans sanctified their own militarism. Every war, every conquest, every subjugated territory wasn't an act of aggression. It was a pious duty to their divine ancestor. They turned a vice into a virtue. They took the Greek embodiment of war's horror and remolded him into a symbol of national pride. It was the ultimate justification for empire, a divine permission slip for world domination, written into the very DNA of their gods. The message was brutally effective. To be a good Roman was to be a good soldier. To fight for Rome was to worship Mars. The Greek version, the god who screamed in pain and fled the battle, had to be buried. He was a threat to the imperial machine. The changes to the king of the gods and the god of war were foundational. Rome had successfully replaced Greek passion with Roman duty, and Greek fear of war with Roman glorification of it. They had created divine figureheads perfectly suited for an empire of soldiers and administrators. But this was just the beginning. To truly conquer the Greek soul, to complete the heist, Rome had to target something even more fundamental. They had to seize control of the culture's ideas of love, beauty, wisdom, and the wild, untamable forces of nature. And what they did to the goddesses Aphrodite and Athena, and the wild god Dionysus, was perhaps the most insidious transformation of all. The transformation of Aphrodite into Venus is a masterclass in cultural hijacking. To the Greeks, Aphrodite wasn't just a pretty face. She was a primordial force. Born from the sea foam that frothed around the severed genitals of the sky god Uranus, she was older than Zeus, older than the Olympians. She represented a power that was raw, untamable, and cosmic. Her domain was not just gentle love, but overwhelming, life-altering, city-destroying passion. This was the force that drove Helen to Troy, that sparked a decade of brutal war. She was desire itself, in all its terrifying and creative glory. She was a goddess of sailors, a protector of prostitutes, a force of nature as unpredictable as the ocean from which she was born. Her affairs were legendary. Her children were forces like Eros, desire, and harmonia, but also Phobos and Deimos, fear and terror. She was a complex, dangerous, and utterly sovereign entity. Rome couldn't have that. A chaotic, self-willed goddess of passion was a direct threat to the Roman ideals of pietas, duty to family, state, and gods, and gravitas, a dignified seriousness. So they performed a brilliant act of mythological surgery. They took this wild oceanic force and gave her a new job. They made her a mother, specifically their mother. Through the story of the Trojan hero Aeneas, who escaped the fall of Troy to eventually found the Roman race, they rebranded her. Aeneas was Aphrodite's son. Therefore, Aphrodite, now called Venus, was Venus Genetrix, the divine mother of the Roman people. Suddenly, her entire identity shifted. She was no longer the universal, unpredictable force of desire. She was the matriarch of Rome. Her primary role was no longer to inspire chaotic passion, but to ensure the continuation of the Roman bloodline, to legitimize the ruling dynasty. Julius Caesar himself claimed direct descent from Venus to bolster his own authority. Her untamed sexuality was reframed as maternal fertility. The temples built for her in Rome weren't celebrating wild abandon. They were celebrating Roman lineage and destiny. They took the goddess of the affair and made her the goddess of the family tree. They took a force of nature and made her a national monument. The wildness was gone, replaced by a stately, patriotic dignity. It was a promotion in title, but a radical reduction in her true cosmic power. Then there was Athena. In the Greek world, Athena was a titan, born fully formed and armed from the head of Zeus. She was the goddess of wisdom, but it was a specific kind of wisdom: strategic, tactical, and civic. She was a warrior, but not a berserker. She was the brilliant general, the master strategist. While Ares represented the bloody, chaotic slaughter of battle, Athena represented the clear-eyed, intelligent application of force that leads to victory. She was the patron of Athens, the cradle of democracy and philosophy. She was civilization itself, in its most potent form, intellect backed by unassailable strength. She was the protector of heroes, the weaver of destiny, a political and military powerhouse who stood shoulder to shoulder with the most powerful male gods. The Romans already had a goddess named Minerva. She was a respected member of their chief divine trio, the Capitoline Triad, alongside Jupiter and Juno. But her portfolio was different. She was a goddess of wisdom, yes, but also of crafts, poetry, medicine, and commerce. A patroness of artisans and thinkers. When the Romans absorbed Greece, they looked at the formidable Athena and said, "Yes, she is our Minerva." But in this fusion, something critical was lost in translation. Or rather, it was deliberately edited out. Rome already had a god of war. A very, very important one, Mars. Roman identity was forged in conquest. Mars was central to their self-image. He was brutal, relentless, and a father of their founder, Romulus. There was simply no room in the Roman imagination for a female deity to share the portfolio of war. It would dilute the raw masculine power of Mars. So they amplified Minerva's role as a patron of the arts and crafts and systematically downplayed Athena's military genius. Minerva's wisdom became less about battlefield strategy and more about intellectual and artistic pursuits. She became more of a wise schoolteacher and less of a five-star general, the warrior goddess who guided Odysseus through his trials and stood as the armed protector of a great city-state was transformed into a tamer, more appropriate figure who wouldn't step on the toes of their primary god of conquest. They took Athena's spear and essentially replaced it with a paintbrush and a loom, sidelining her from the sphere of influence that mattered most to the Roman state, the battlefield. But the most blatant and fearful act of identity theft was what they did to Dionysus. To the Greeks, Dionysus was far more than a god of wine. He was the god of ecstatic release, of breaking boundaries, of tearing down the walls of the self. He represented everything that civilized, rational society tries to suppress: the wild, the irrational, the primal. His worship involved frenzied, hypnotic dancing, music, and intoxication that led to ecstasis, literally, standing outside oneself. His followers, the Maenads, were women who would leave their homes and their weaving to run wild in the mountains, possessed by a divine madness, capable of superhuman strength. He was a god of duality, the joyful liberator and the terrifying destroyer. He could bring you the ultimate spiritual freedom, or he could drive you to rip your own family members apart, as he did to King Pentheus in the myth. He was a deeply subversive god who challenged every social norm, every rule, every rigid structure of the city-state. He was a force of pure, unadulterated chaos, and the Roman Senate was absolutely terrified of him. When the worship of Dionysus, under the name Bacchus, arrived in Rome, it spread like wildfire, especially among the lower classes, women, and slaves. These were secret, nocturnal rites, promising a direct, personal connection to the divine that the official state religion couldn't offer. The Roman authorities saw this not as religion, but as a political conspiracy, a threat to public order and Roman morality. In 186 BC, they acted decisively. The Senate issued a decree, the Senatus Consultum de Bacchanalibus, which brutally suppressed the cult. Thousands of followers were arrested and executed. It was a full-blown witch hunt. After they had stamped out the authentic ecstatic cult, they allowed a new version to emerge, a version they could control. This was the Bacchus we know today, the jolly, overweight, perpetually drunk party god. A caricature. They stripped him of all his terrifying transformative power. They took away the divine madness, the spiritual ecstasy, the social subversion. They reduced the god who could dissolve your ego and connect you to the primal heartbeat of the universe into a simple mascot for overindulgence. The Roman Bacchus wasn't a threat to anyone. He was just the lord of a good time, a patron of the vineyard. They performed the ultimate act of domestication. They took a god of revolution and turned him into the god of the hangover. They took a tiger, pulled its teeth and claws, and told the world it was a house cat. This wasn't just an adaptation. It was a deliberate and fearful suppression of an idea too dangerous for the Roman world to handle. And this suppression wasn't a one-off. It was a systemic, empire-wide policy of ideological filtration. The Romans looked at the Greek pantheon and saw a reflection of the Greek character. Brilliant, creative, philosophical, but also chaotic, emotionally volatile, and dangerously individualistic. An empire isn't built on individuality. It's built on unity, discipline, and a shared sense of purpose. The Roman state was the ultimate collective project, and their gods had to be brought in line. They needed to be state employees, not unpredictable forces of nature. And nowhere is this more obvious, more brutally clear, than in the transformation of the god of war. To the Greeks, war was a horrifying, necessary evil. And they had a god who perfectly embodied that horror, Ares. Ares wasn't the god of strategy or valor or noble sacrifice. He was the god of bloodlust. He was the screeching, adrenaline-fueled frenzy of the battlefield, the savage thrill of plunging a spear into another man. He was the personification of slaughter. The other gods, including his own father Zeus, openly despised him. In the Iliad, Zeus looks at a wounded Ares and tells him to his face, "To me you are the most hateful of all the gods who hold Olympus." Why? Because Ares was a hot-headed, impulsive brute. He was a bully who would often lose his nerve and flee the battlefield, screaming in pain. He was driven by pure, unthinking rage. He once had an affair with Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and they were caught in a golden net by her husband, the smith god Hephaestus, who then dragged them before the other gods to be mocked and ridiculed. This wasn't a respected deity. This was a problem child. A divine thug who represented the ugliest aspect of human conflict. The Greeks understood that this violent frenzy was a part of war, so they gave it a name and a face, but they never ever celebrated it. Now look at what Rome did. They took this detested god of slaughter and transformed him into Mars. In the Roman pantheon, Mars wasn't just respected, he was revered. He was second in importance only to Jupiter, the king of the gods. Mars wasn't the god of mindless frenzy. He was the god of disciplined, strategic Roman warfare. He was the divine engine of the Roman legions. When a Roman soldier marched into battle, he wasn't channeling the chaotic rage of Ares. He was embodying the strength and order of Mars. Mars was a protector of the city, a guardian of agriculture, and most importantly, he was the mythical father of Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome itself. He was literally their divine ancestor. Do you see the staggering difference? The Greeks created a god to represent the horror they felt about war's brutality. The Romans created a god to justify and glorify their own military expansion. Ares was a warning. Mars was a recruitment poster. By transforming Ares into Mars, the Romans weren't just changing a name. They were fundamentally altering the moral landscape of war. They took the concept of battlefield chaos, stripped it of its horror, and repackaged it as a civic virtue, a sacred duty to the state. It was one of the most successful rebranding campaigns in human history, and they did the exact same thing to the most powerful and disruptive force in the human experience: love. For the Greeks, this force was Aphrodite, and she was terrifying. We think of her as the goddess of love and beauty, but that's a sanitized, modern interpretation. To the ancient Greeks, Aphrodite was a primal, uncontrollable power. Her origin story alone tells you everything you need to know. She wasn't born like the other Olympians. She was born when the Titan Cronus castrated his father, Uranus, and threw his severed genitals into the sea. From the churning, bloody sea foam, Aphrodite emerged, fully grown and impossibly beautiful. She was born from an act of horrific violence and sexual mutilation. That was the Greek understanding of love and desire. It was a force tied to violence, chaos, and madness. Aphrodite wasn't a gentle, cherubic matchmaker. She was a force that could bring kings and kingdoms to their knees. It was her vanity and her meddling that directly caused the Trojan War, a conflict that wiped out a generation of heroes. She was fickle, jealous, and utterly self-serving. Her love was a weapon, and she wielded it without a conscience. Like Ares, she represented a raw, untamable aspect of human nature that the Greeks recognized and feared. Rome couldn't have that. An empire built on order, family, and duty, the mos maiorum, the way of the ancestors, could not worship a goddess of chaotic, self-serving passion. So they performed another ideological surgery. They took Aphrodite and turned her into Venus. On the surface, they seem similar, goddesses of love, beauty, and desire. But the Roman Venus had a completely different job description. Her primary, most important role was as Venus Genetrix, Venus the Mother. The mother of whom? Of the Roman people. In Roman mythology, it was Venus's son, the hero Aeneas, who escaped the fall of Troy and traveled to Italy to become the ancestor of the entire Roman race. Suddenly, Venus's power of love and desire wasn't a disruptive, individualistic force anymore. It was the procreative engine of Roman destiny. Her beauty wasn't just for her own vanity. It was a symbol of the allure and glory of Rome itself. Julius Caesar even claimed direct descent from Venus, building a magnificent temple to her in the heart of Rome to solidify his own divine right to rule. The Romans took this wild, unpredictable Greek goddess of passion and gave her a mission: the founding and perpetuation of the Roman state. They transformed her from a force of nature into a political tool. They made her the ultimate matriarch, whose purpose was to produce loyal Roman citizens. They took the most dangerous individualistic emotion and made it an act of patriotic duty. What we're seeing is a pattern of domestication. The Romans acted like cultural engineers, identifying the most volatile and unpredictable elements of Greek mythology and systematically neutralizing them. They saw Dionysus's ecstatic madness and turned it into a supervised holiday. They saw Ares's brutal rage and turned it into military discipline. They saw Aphrodite's chaotic passion and turned it into civic motherhood. They were building a pantheon that reflected their ideal society: ordered, purposeful, and with every individual, mortal or divine, serving the greater good of the state. The Greek gods were a dysfunctional family of brilliant, squabbling artists. The Roman gods were a board of directors for the corporation of Rome. This wasn't a simple copy-and-paste job. It was a hostile takeover of an entire belief system, retrofitting it to power the greatest empire the world had ever known. But if they could do this to the gods of wine, war, and love, what did they do to the boss? What happened when this Roman project of order and control came face to face with the most powerful, most capricious, and most flagrantly chaotic god of them all? How did they dare to tame the king of Olympus, the unfaithful, unpredictable, and temperamental Zeus himself? The answer reveals the very soul of the Roman Empire, and the profound difference between a king who rules by whim and a father who presides over destiny. To understand how Rome remade the king of the gods, you first have to understand what they were building. The Greeks built city-states. They were brilliant, chaotic, and fiercely independent hubs of philosophy, art, and drama. Their king of the gods, Zeus, was a perfect reflection of this. He was a force of nature, a brilliant, creative, and terrifyingly volatile individualist. He answered to no one, followed no law but his own desire, and his personal dramas could bring the entire mortal world to its knees. Now look at Rome. Rome wasn't building a city, it was building an empire, a system, a machine of law, conquest, and administration designed to span the known world and last for 1,000 years. A system like that cannot have a god like Zeus at its head. An empire built on order cannot be ruled by a king who thrives on chaos. A state that worships the law cannot have a chief deity who is fundamentally lawless. So the Romans didn't just rename Zeus. They fundamentally rewrote his character from the ground up. They performed the most audacious identity theft in history, taking the raw power of the Greek sky god and forging it into something entirely new, something Roman. They created Jupiter. The very name tells you everything. Zeus, from the ancient root for sky or to shine. He's a primal force. But Jupiter? It's a contraction of Iovis Pater, the sky father. That second word, pater, is the key that unlocks the entire Roman mindset. In Rome, the pater familias, the father of the family, was the supreme authority. He held the power of life and death over his children. He was the family's chief priest, its chief judge, its absolute ruler. He was expected to be stern, dutiful, and unwavering. His defining characteristic wasn't passion. It was gravitas, a deep, unshakable seriousness. Jupiter was the paterfamilias of the entire Roman state. Where Zeus threw thunderbolts in fits of rage or lust, Jupiter hurled them to enforce divine law and punish oathbreakers. His lightning wasn't a tantrum. It was a sentence being carried out. The Greeks looked up at a stormy sky and saw Zeus in a mood. The Romans looked up and saw the ultimate judge presiding over his court. Every action Jupiter took was imbued with purpose, with a sense of cosmic destiny. He wasn't just managing the affairs of Olympus. He was managing the inexorable, divinely ordained rise of Rome itself. This wasn't just a subtle shift in emphasis. It was a complete overhaul of his mythology. Consider the most famous story of Rome's founding, Virgil's Aeneid. In the Greek version of the Trojan War, Zeus is a conflicted, often biased referee. He favors the Trojans but is constantly manipulated by his wife Hera and other gods, changing his mind, making deals, and generally adding to the chaos. He's a powerful player, but he's still just one personality in a dysfunctional family squabble. In the Aeneid, Jupiter is something else entirely. He is no longer a player in the game. He is the game. He is the embodiment of fate or fatum. From the very beginning of the epic, he lays out the entire future of the Roman people to his daughter Venus. He speaks not of his personal feelings, but of a grand historical blueprint. He declares, "On these people I place no limits of time or space. I have given them an empire that will know no end." This is not the Greek Zeus. That Zeus could barely plan his next illicit affair, let alone map out 1,000 years of imperial history. The Jupiter of the Aeneid is a celestial CEO, a divine emperor overseeing the greatest project in history, Rome. When his wife, Juno, the Roman Hera, tries to thwart the Trojan hero Aeneas, Jupiter doesn't get into a shouting match with her. He convenes a council. He listens to the arguments, and then he lays down the law. He delivers a verdict, reminding her that Aeneas's destiny to found Rome is non-negotiable. It is fate. It is his will. The matter is closed. He is calm, resolute, and absolutely in charge. The drama is stripped away, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of Roman law and destiny. The Romans took all the scandalous stories the Greeks loved about Zeus, his transformations into a swan, a bull, a shower of gold to pursue mortal women, and they filed them away. They didn't erase them, but they treated them like youthful indiscretions. It was the old god, the Greek version. Their god, Jupiter Optimus Maximus, Jupiter the best and greatest, was far too busy running the universe to engage in such undignified behavior. His temple on the Capitoline Hill wasn't just a church. It was the spiritual center of the empire. It was where generals ended their triumphal parades, where solemn oaths were sworn, and where crucial treaties were kept. It was the divine equivalent of the White House, the Supreme Court, and the National Archives all rolled into one. It was a place of business, the headquarters of Roman power, presided over by a god who was all business. Even his marriage was rebranded. The union of Zeus and Hera is famously stormy, a constant battle of wits between a philandering husband and a vengefully jealous wife. Their fights are legendary and deeply personal. The marriage of Jupiter and Juno, however, was presented as a divine partnership. They were the king and queen of the gods, and their union, called the hieros gamos or sacred marriage, was a symbol of the stability and fecundity of the state. Yes, Juno could be wrathful. Her grudge against Aeneas drives the entire first half of the Aeneid, but her anger is framed not just as personal jealousy, but as a threat to the divine order and the destiny of Rome. When she and Jupiter clash, it's a conflict of cosmic principles, not just a domestic dispute. This is the genius of the Roman cultural machine. They recognize the raw power and universal appeal of the Greek sky god, but they also recognize that his personality was fundamentally incompatible with their own vision of the world. The Greek soul valued individual genius, passionate emotion, and tragic, beautiful chaos. The Roman soul valued the collective, the system. It valued duty, pietas above all else. A Roman hero like Aeneas is defined not by his personal desires, but by his willingness to sacrifice them for the good of his people and the destiny of Rome. How could a man like that worship a god like Zeus, who never sacrificed his own desires for anyone? He couldn't. So the Romans gave him, and themselves, a god worth following. They took the wild, untamable king and forced him into the role of the ultimate father, the ultimate judge. They stripped him of his passions and gave him a purpose. They stole Zeus's thunder, literally, but they repurposed it as the gavel of divine justice. They looked at the king of Olympus and saw not a ruler to be feared for his whims, but a divine magistrate to be respected for his unwavering commitment to the law, a law whose ultimate expression was the glory of Rome. The transformation was so complete that for centuries, the two were seen as one and the same. But they are not. One is a king, the other is a concept. One is a personality, the other is an institution. And this process of cultural appropriation and re-engineering didn't stop at the top. The Romans looked at the rest of the chaotic, dysfunctional family on Mount Olympus and saw a host of other raw, powerful concepts that needed to be tamed, disciplined, and put to work for the empire. Next on their list was the god of the sea, a deity as unpredictable and destructive as his brother Zeus, and just as unfit for the Roman world. They would take the wild, earth-shaking Poseidon and forge him into a god worthy of a nation that commanded the entire Mediterranean. And so the Roman project began, to take the tempestuous, earth-shattering god of the Greeks and transform him into a deity fit for the masters of the known world. To understand the scale of this divine identity theft, you first have to understand just how terrifying Poseidon really was. We think of him as the god of the sea, but that's a dangerously incomplete job description. The Greeks called him Enosikthon, the earth-shaker. For a civilization living in a hotbed of seismic activity, the god who could splinter the very ground beneath your feet was not a distant maritime power. He was a constant, terrifying, and immediate threat. The sea for the Greeks was a reflection of Poseidon's personality, a vast, untamable, monster-filled frontier. It was a place of chaos, a boundary to their world, not a highway through it. To sail the Aegean was to place your life in the hands of a moody, unpredictable tyrant who might smash your ship to pieces over a perceived slight or simply because his temper flared. This was the god who, in a fit of rage, flooded the plains of Argos because the people chose Hera as their patron. This was the god who relentlessly tormented Odysseus for a decade, not out of some grand cosmic principle, but out of a petty, vindictive grudge for blinding his son, the Cyclops. Poseidon was personal, he was passionate, and his power was pure elemental fury. Now look at the Romans. Their entire empire, their entire identity, was built on the opposite principle: control. They built aqueducts to tame rivers, roads to conquer landscapes, and laws to govern humanity. When they looked at the Mediterranean, they didn't see a chaotic frontier. They saw a tool, a superhighway for their legions, a trade route for their merchants, a source of immense wealth and power. They even renamed it Mare Nostrum, our sea. It was a declaration of ownership. You cannot own something that is fundamentally uncontrollable. You cannot call a sea yours if its ruling deity is a chaotic madman who sinks ships on a whim. The Roman worldview and the Greek Poseidon were utterly incompatible. So, the Romans didn't just grab Poseidon and slap a new name on him. Their process was far more cunning. They already had a god named Neptune. But this original Neptune was a minor, almost forgotten deity. He wasn't a god of the vast, salty ocean. He was a humble god of freshwater springs and irrigation. He was the spirit of the water you could use, the water that fed crops, filled baths, and ran through aqueducts. He was a god of managed resources, of water tamed for a civic purpose. He was, in his very essence, a Roman concept. What the Romans did was a masterstroke of religious engineering. They took the grand, awe-inspiring iconography of Poseidon, the mighty trident, the chariot pulled by hippocamps, the dominion over the waves, and they grafted it onto the stable, predictable, and useful personality of their own freshwater god. They essentially promoted Neptune, giving him a massive new portfolio, the entire ocean, but insisting he manage it like a Roman. The result was a complete character assassination of Poseidon. The Earthshaker was retired. The vengeful sea tyrant was fired. In his place stood Neptune, a stately, majestic, and above all reliable god. Think about their foundational epic, Virgil's Aeneid. When the goddess Juno, hating the Trojan hero Aeneas, convinces the god of winds to whip up a monstrous storm, who shows up to fix it? It's Neptune. But listen to how he does it. He doesn't rage or roar. He rises calmly from the waves, sees the chaos, and gets annoyed. He doesn't scream at the heavens. He scolds the winds like a provincial governor reprimanding unruly subordinates. He tells them they have overstepped their authority, that the dominion of the sea belongs to him, and that they should get back in their place. He then effortlessly calms the waves, restores order, and ensures Aeneas's fleet can continue its journey to found Rome. This is not Poseidon. Poseidon is the storm. He would have been the one gleefully smashing the ships. Roman Neptune, by contrast, is the divine coast guard. He is the restorer of order, the protector of shipping lanes, the guarantor of Mare Nostrum. He represents the taming of the wild by Roman authority. His primary role isn't to shake the earth but to ensure the grain ships from Egypt arrive on time. This ideological shift is perfectly captured in one of Poseidon's most famous myths, his contest with Athena for the patronage of Athens. To win the city's favor, Poseidon strikes the Acropolis with his trident, and a spring of salt water bursts forth. It's a spectacular display of raw, untamed power. It's impressive, but it's also completely useless. You can't drink it, you can't water crops with it. It's a monument to his own ego. Athena, in contrast, gives the city the olive tree, a source of food, oil, and wood, a gift of civilization, of cultivation, of long-term prosperity. The Athenians, of course, chose Athena. The Romans, in their divine rebranding, essentially made the same choice. They rejected the god of useless saltwater and embraced a god who provided a tangible benefit to the state. Even Poseidon's association with horses was sanitized. For the Greeks, the horse was a symbol of Poseidon's wild, untamed, and violent nature. He was said to have created the first horse by striking a rock, and it embodied his chaotic energy. The Romans kept the association but completely changed the context. Neptune became the patron of horse racing. He wasn't the god of the wild stallion running free. He was the god of the Circus Maximus, of a highly organized, state-sponsored spectacle where that wild energy was channeled, controlled, and turned into public entertainment. He took Poseidon's symbol of chaos and put it on a racetrack with lanes and betting odds. This transformation was a psychological necessity. The Romans built the most stable and enduring empire the world had ever seen. They couldn't worship a god who represented instability. They were a people of engineering, law, and logistics. Their gods had to reflect that. Jupiter became a divine senator, a CEO of the cosmos, and Poseidon, the embodiment of natural disaster and unpredictable rage, had to become Neptune, the divine admiral of the Roman fleet, the celestial harbor master ensuring the smooth operation of empire. The Romans looked at the terrifying, chaotic Greek god of the sea and saw a problem that needed to be solved. They didn't just rename him. They fundamentally rewrote his character to align with their own imperial ambitions. They stripped him of his earthquakes, his tempers, and his personal vendettas, and replaced them with dignity, authority, and a sense of civic duty. They had conquered the physical Mediterranean with their galleys and legions. It was only fitting that they conquer its god with their values. They had tamed the sky and the sea, molding the gods of Olympus into reflections of their own orderly world. But there was one realm even the Romans could not conquer, a kingdom of shadows and silence ruled by a god so feared. The Greeks barely dared to speak his name. The Romans, however, would find a way to turn even the Lord of the Dead into a source of immense wealth. His Greek name was Hades, the Unseen One. And to understand the sheer genius of the Roman rebranding, you first have to understand the sheer terror he inspired in the Greeks. Hades wasn't evil, not in the way we think of a devil. He wasn't a tempter or a source of cosmic chaos. He was worse. He was inevitable. He was the final, non-negotiable end to all things. The Greeks saw him as a grim, solitary king, ruling his shadowy domain with an iron and impartial hand. He was the god of the fine print, the final clause in the contract of life. Once you entered his kingdom, there were no appeals, no second chances. You were simply done. This is why the Greeks almost never said his name. To speak the name Hades was to risk drawing his attention, like shouting into a silent abyss and hoping nothing answers back. Instead, they used euphemisms. They called him the Unseen One because he possessed a helmet, the helm of darkness, that made him invisible. They called him by titles that hinted at his power without naming him directly. But the most important euphemism, the one the Romans would seize upon, was Pluton. It meant the rich one, or the giver of wealth. For the Greeks, this was a desperate attempt at flattery. They weren't really celebrating his riches. They were trying to appease a terrifying force by focusing on a less horrifying aspect of his domain. After all, the earth holds not just the dead, but also precious metals and the fertile soil from which crops, the wealth of the ancient world, spring forth. "Oh, great Pluton," they were essentially saying, "please think of us for our harvest, not for our graves." Hades's kingdom was a reflection of his personality. Vast, gloomy, and inescapable, it was a place of shades and whispers, where the souls of the dead flitted about like bats, stripped of their memories and passions. It wasn't a place of fire and brimstone for everyone. That was reserved for a special section called Tartarus. For most, the Greek afterlife was just an eternity of gray, tedious nothingness. And ruling over it all was the silent king on his ebony throne, with his three-headed guard dog, Cerberus, at his feet. He was a god so isolated, he had to abduct his own wife, Persephone, just to have a queen, a myth that itself explained the death of the world every winter. He was a cosmic necessity, but one nobody wanted to think about. Then came the Romans, the practical, ambitious, and deeply transactional Romans. Their early beliefs about the afterlife were vague, centered on ancestral spirits. But as their world expanded, they needed a more concrete, more organized cosmology. They looked at the Greek system and saw a perfectly good god of the underworld going to waste, a divine asset bogged down by bad PR. They saw the fear surrounding Hades and thought, not how terrifying, but how inefficient. So, they performed one of the most brilliant marketing pivots in history. They ignored the name Hades and all the existential dread that came with it. Instead, they took that Greek euphemism, Pluton, Latinized it to Pluto, and made it his official primary identity. They didn't just change his name, they changed his entire job description. The Romans stripped away the grim, silent king persona and replaced it with something far more appealing to their culture: a divine CEO of underground resources. Suddenly, the Lord of the Dead was also the Lord of Wealth, and not in a metaphorical, rich in souls kind of way. No, this was literal. Pluto was the god of all the gold, silver, iron, and precious gems buried in the earth. He was the divine source of mineral wealth. His domain wasn't just a repository for the dead, it was a treasure vault. This simple shift was revolutionary. It transformed the most feared god into one you might actually want to pray to. Are you a miner hoping to strike a rich vein of silver? Pray to Pluto. Are you a farmer, relying on the mysterious wealth of the soil to feed your family? Pray to Pluto. The Romans, masters of engineering and infrastructure, understood that true power and wealth came from what you could dig out of the ground. And now they had a god for that. Pluto became a far more complex and, frankly, more useful deity than Hades ever was. He was still the ruler of the afterlife, but that became just one part of his portfolio. His public image was that of a stern but respectable businessman. He was the divine plutocrat, the namesake for the very concept of plutocracy, rule by the wealthy. The Romans even gave him a different visual identity. While Hades was often depicted as grim and severe, Pluto was sometimes shown holding a cornucopia, the horn of plenty, overflowing with the riches of the harvest. He was the god of abundance that comes from below, the ultimate provider of earthly fortune. The contrast is stunning. Hades was the god of the final destination. Pluto was the god of the resources you acquire along the journey. Praying to Hades was like trying to negotiate with death itself, pointless and terrifying. Praying to Pluto was like making a business deal. It was a transaction. I give you this sacrifice, you give me a bountiful mine. It was a religion perfectly tailored for an empire built on conquest, trade, and the exploitation of natural resources. To keep Pluto's image clean and focused on wealth, the Romans cleverly outsourced the dirtier aspects of death. They had another, older, more monstrous god named Orcus. Orcus was the Punisher, the god of broken oaths, the monstrous entity who dragged souls to a place of torment. By splitting the job, they allowed Pluto to remain the dignified, wealthy king, while Orcus handled the more unsavory side of the afterlife. It was a divine division of labor. Hades had to be both the judge and the jailer. Pluto just had to be the owner of the property. This transformation is the ultimate example of the Roman mindset. They looked at the Greek pantheon not as a set of sacred, unchangeable truths, but as a collection of powerful concepts that could be optimized, improved, and adapted to serve the Roman state. They took the Greek concept of death, an abstract philosophical terror, and turned it into an economic principle. They monetized the king of the underworld. But this pattern of theft and transformation wasn't just about making scary gods more palatable. It was about elevating gods who served a distinctly Roman purpose. The Greeks had a god of war, a brutal, bloodthirsty thug so hated and despised that even his own parents, Zeus and Hera, couldn't stand the sight of him. He was a divine outcast, a representation of the pure, chaotic horror of battle. The Romans would take this very same god, this pariah, and turn him into a national hero, a revered icon, the mythological father of their entire civilization, and a figure so important he was second only to the king of the gods himself. His name was Mars, and to the Romans he was everything Ares was not. Where Ares was impulsive and chaotic, Mars was strategic and disciplined. Where Ares embodied the frenzied, blood-soaked horror of battle that even other gods despised, Mars represented the noble, ordered, and necessary violence that secured and expanded the Roman state. He was the divine embodiment of Roman military virtue, virtus, a concept blending courage, manliness, and a sense of duty. The Greeks built temples to Ares far from their city centers, as if to keep the stench of slaughter at a distance. The Romans built one of the most important areas in their capital, the Campus Martius, the Field of Mars, right outside the city's sacred boundary, a place for military training, triumphal parades, and civic assemblies. It was the launching pad for Roman power, and it bore his name. So how did this rebranding happen? How did Rome take a divine thug and turn him into a respected patriarch? They did it by changing his story. And the most brilliant, most audacious change they made was giving him a new family. In Greek mythology, Ares was mostly famous for his children with Aphrodite. Phobos and Deimos, fear and terror, literal personifications of the dread he inspired. But the Romans? They gave Mars two sons who would change the world, Romulus and Remus. According to their foundational myth, Mars descended upon a Vestal virgin named Rhea Silvia, and from this union came the twin founders of Rome itself. This is not a minor adjustment. This is a complete rewriting of national identity. By making Mars their divine ancestor, the Romans weren't just choosing a patron god of war. They were claiming that the very essence of war, of divine strength and martial prowess, flowed through their veins. Every Roman citizen could trace their lineage, mythologically speaking, back to the god of war. Their destiny to conquer, their right to rule was a birthright, handed down from their celestial father. This single story elevated Mars from a mere Olympian to the progenitor of the Roman people, a figure of immense paternal gravity. He wasn't just a god they prayed to for victory. He was the reason they were born to win. This new role as a father figure completely reframed his relationship with his lover, Venus, the Roman Aphrodite. The Greek affair between Ares and Aphrodite was a tawdry, scandalous soap opera. They were caught in a golden net by Aphrodite's husband, Hephaestus, and publicly shamed before the other gods, who laughed at their humiliation. It was a story about lust, adultery, and embarrassment. The Romans, however, saw the union of Mars and Venus in a far more philosophical light. It wasn't just a fling, it was a cosmic balancing act. The union of the god of strife and the goddess of love was seen as the force that created harmony in the universe. It was a powerful allegory. From the necessary conflict of war comes the peace and prosperity that allows love and beauty to flourish. Their affair wasn't a source of shame. It was a symbol of the Roman world order. War and love, the two most powerful forces in human existence, were the twin pillars of their civilization, a concept far more profound than the petty squabbles of the Greek Olympians. But the Roman genius for rebranding didn't stop there. They also reached back into Mars's deeper, more ancient past. Before Rome was a sprawling empire, it was a collection of farming communities. And in those early days, Mars wasn't just a god of the spear. He was a god of the soil. He was an agricultural guardian, invoked to protect fields from blight and livestock from wolves. The ancient Cato the Elder recorded a prayer to Mars Silvanus, Mars of the forest, to ward off disease from cattle. This duality was critical. Mars wasn't just the god who led soldiers into battle. He was the god who protected the farms that fed those soldiers and the homeland they fought for. He had two primary aspects: Mars Gradivus, the one who marches, the god of war on the offensive, leading the legions to glory abroad, and Mars Pater, Father Mars, the protector of the city, its people, and its agriculture at home. This made him a god for everyone. The general prayed to Mars Gradivus before a campaign. The farmer prayed to Mars Pater for a good harvest. He embodied the ideal of the Roman citizen soldier, the man who would put down his plow to pick up his sword to defend the Republic, and then return to his fields once peace was secured. Ares had no such nuance. He was war, and only war in its ugliest form. Mars was the protector of the entire Roman way of life, in peacetime and in wartime. This reverence was woven into the very fabric of Roman state religion. The month of March, Martius, the beginning of the campaigning season, was named for him. His sacred animals, the woodpecker and the wolf, were deeply symbolic. The wolf, a ferocious predator, was also the very animal that was said to have suckled his sons, Romulus and Remus. His priests, the Salii, were not fringe mystics but an order of the patrician elite. Every year they would process through the city in archaic armor, chanting ancient hymns and performing a ritual war dance, striking their sacred shields, the ancilia, which were said to have fallen from heaven as a pledge of Rome's eternal power. One of the most telling rituals was the sacrifice of the October horse. At the end of the military campaigning season in October, a chariot race was held on the Campus Martius. The right-hand horse of the winning team was then sacrificed to Mars. Its head was cut off and fought over by the local citizens, and its tail was rushed to the Regia, the home of the king of sacred rites, so its blood could drip onto the hearth, purifying and protecting the city. This was no simple offering. It was a complex state-sponsored ritual that tied together victory and war, the end of the harvest season, and the spiritual purification of Rome, all under the watchful eye of Mars. Can you imagine the Greeks performing such a solemn central state ceremony for Ares? It's unthinkable. They kept him at arm's length. The Romans embraced Mars and placed him at the very heart of their identity. Ultimately, the transformation from Ares to Mars is a story about cultural values. The Greeks, for all their warring city-states, were a culture that prized philosophy, art, and debate. They saw unrestrained war as embodied by Ares as a failure of reason, a descent into animalistic chaos. The Romans, on the other hand, were a pragmatic, militaristic culture that saw organized, disciplined warfare as a necessary tool for imposing order on a chaotic world. It was the instrument of their Pax Romana, the Roman peace. They couldn't have a god who represented the horror of war. They needed a god who represented the glory of war, the necessity of war, and the duty of the soldier. They needed a divine champion who reflected their own ambition and their vision of themselves. So they didn't just borrow Ares. They took the raw, violent clay of the Greek god and sculpted him into the perfect Roman ideal. A father, a protector, a strategist, and the divine ancestor of the greatest empire the world had ever known. But this process of pragmatic rebranding wasn't limited to the god of war. The Romans applied this same logic to nearly every deity they adopted. They looked at the Greek gods not as fixed personalities, but as raw potential to be molded to fit their own needs. Consider, for example, the Greek god Hermes, a wily, fast-moving messenger, a patron of travelers, merchants, and thieves, a charming trickster who stole cattle from Apollo on the day he was born. The Romans saw him and recognized a kernel of immense value, but the trickster element wasn't quite what their society, built on contracts, trade, and infrastructure, needed most. They needed a god of commerce, a god of profit, and so they transformed the nimble-footed messenger into something far more lucrative. And so the Greek god of travelers, thieves, and eloquent speech was rebranded for a civilization obsessed with the bottom line. The very name Mercury comes from the Latin word merx, which means merchandise. It's right there in the open. They didn't even try to hide it. While the Greeks honored Hermes with stone piles on the roadside to guide travelers, the Romans built temples to Mercury in the heart of their bustling markets, right next to the grain exchange. His primary festival, the Mercurialia, was celebrated by merchants, who would sprinkle water from his sacred well over their goods and themselves, praying for profit and the forgiveness of any, let's call it creative accounting, they might have used. They took the multifaceted, morally ambiguous Greek trickster and streamlined him into the divine CEO of Roman commerce. It was a pragmatic choice, a business decision, and if there's one thing the Romans understood, it was business. But this transformation, this corporate-style rebranding, was nothing compared to what they did to the most hated, most feared, and most disrespected god on Mount Olympus, the Greek god of war, Ares. To the Greeks, Ares was not a figure of glory. He was a butcher. He was the personification of bloodlust, of the chaotic, frenzied, screaming horror of the battlefield. He wasn't a strategist. He was a berserker. He loved war for its own sake, for the sheer violence and slaughter. In the Iliad, the foundational epic of Greek culture, he is portrayed as a whining, impulsive brute. He's wounded by a mortal hero, Diomedes, and runs screaming back to Olympus, where his own father, Zeus, looks at him in disgust and says, "To me you are the most hateful of all the gods who hold Olympus. Forever strife is dear to you, and wars and fighting." Think about that. The king of the gods tells his own son, the god of war, that he can't stand him. Ares was an embarrassment. He was associated with the wild, uncivilized lands of Thrace, not the sophisticated philosophical centers like Athens. The Athenians built their grandest temple, the Parthenon, to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. Ares had a minor temple, a footnote in the city's grand architecture. He represented the part of war that everyone dreaded, the loss of humanity, the descent into savagery. He was a necessary evil, a force to be acknowledged but never, ever celebrated. Now hold that image in your mind, the despised, brutish, chaotic Ares. And let's look at who he became in Rome. Mars. For the Romans, Mars wasn't just a god. He was the god, second only to Jupiter himself. He wasn't some embarrassing, blood-crazed uncle. He was the divine father of the entire Roman people. According to their foundational myth, Mars was the father of Romulus and Remus, the twin founders of the city of Rome. His blood flowed in the veins of every true Roman. While the Greeks kept Ares at arm's length, the Romans embraced Mars as their patriarch, their protector, and the very source of their strength. This wasn't the god of chaotic slaughter. This was the god of disciplined, organized, and victorious warfare. Mars was the divine patron of the Roman legions, the most effective and ruthless fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. He represented Virtus, the Roman ideal of valor, courage, and excellence. He was the embodiment of the military might that carved out one of the largest empires in history. Before a campaign, Roman generals would enter his temple, shake his sacred spear, and cry out, "Mars Vigila! Mars, wake up!" After a victory, they would dedicate a massive portion of the spoils to him in gratitude. The massive field in Rome where the army trained and citizens gathered was called the Campus Martius, the Field of Mars. His influence was everywhere. So why the dramatic change? Why did one culture's most reviled god become another's revered ancestor? Because the Greeks and Romans had fundamentally different views on war. For the Greeks, particularly the Athenians, war was a tragic interruption of civilized life, of philosophy, art, and politics. For the Romans, war was civilized life. It was the engine of their society. Conquest brought slaves, resources, and land. It was the path to glory, wealth, and power. Their entire civilization was built on the back of the legion. They needed a god who didn't just represent the horror of war, but who sanctified it, who gave it purpose and glory. They needed a god who would bless their expansionist destiny. They didn't adopt Ares. They reinvented him from the ground up to be the perfect divine symbol of Roman imperialism. Mars wasn't just a war god. He was the god of their war, of war as a state-building enterprise. And the changes kept coming. As Rome's power grew, so did the scope of its ambition. For centuries, Rome was a land power. The legion was everything. Their gods reflected that. But then they ran into an enemy they couldn't march to: Carthage, a vast, wealthy empire across the sea in North Africa. To fight them, Rome, a nation of farmers and soldiers, had to do something it had never done before: build a massive navy. And if you're going to build a navy, you need a god to watch over it. The Greeks, a collection of maritime city-states, had the perfect candidate: Poseidon, the earthshaker, a god of immense and terrifying power. Poseidon was the embodiment of the sea's raw, untamable nature. He was moody, violent, and unpredictable, sending storms and earthquakes on a whim. In the Odyssey, he's the main antagonist, a wrathful deity relentlessly punishing Odysseus for blinding his son. He was a primal force, as wild and dangerous as the open ocean itself. The Romans had a god named Neptune, but for most of Roman history, Neptune wasn't a sea god at all. He was a minor god of fresh water, of springs and rivers. Important for an agricultural society, certainly, but he had none of the gravitas or terrifying power of Poseidon. He was the god of irrigation ditches, not ocean tempests. But when the Punic Wars against Carthage began, and Rome suddenly found itself in a life-or-death struggle for control of the Mediterranean, Neptune got a promotion. A massive one. The Romans, in their typically pragmatic fashion, looked at Poseidon, the god of the most successful naval powers they knew, and essentially copy-pasted his entire portfolio onto their humble freshwater deity. Neptune suddenly became the ruler of the seas. He was given the trident, the command over sea creatures, and the domain over the entire ocean. It was a strategic religious necessity. Rome needed a divine admiral for its new fleet, and so Neptune was conscripted. Yet, the identity never quite fit perfectly. Neptune was always seen as more placid than Poseidon. He lacked that wild, earth-shaking rage. He was the god of the Roman sea, the Mare Nostrum, our sea, a body of water that Rome had tamed and controlled for trade and military transport. He was a god of naval dominion, not a god of the chaotic, primordial ocean. Once again, the Romans had taken a Greek concept, a powerful, fearsome god, and reshaped it to serve a specific, practical purpose for their state. They didn't just want a god of the sea. They wanted a god who would guarantee their control over it. From commerce to conquest to control of the waves, the male gods of the Greek pantheon were systematically analyzed, stripped down, and rebuilt to serve the Roman project. They became less like complex, flawed personalities and more like divine department heads in the grand corporation of Rome. But what about the goddesses? What happened when Rome turned its pragmatic gaze upon the powerful, complex, and often dangerous women of Olympus? Did Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite receive the same calculated, corporate makeover? The short answer? They received something far more profound and in many ways far more confining. They were streamlined, sanitized, and given jobs. Clear, practical Roman jobs that served the state. Let's start at the top with the queen herself, Hera. In Greece, Hera was a powerhouse, but her identity was overwhelmingly defined by her dysfunctional marriage to Zeus. She was the jealous wife, the vengeful queen, constantly plotting against her husband's mortal lovers and their illegitimate children. Her stories are filled with rage, passion, and personal vendettas. She was a soap opera star on a cosmic scale. Rome looked at this and saw a public relations nightmare. Their queen of the gods couldn't be defined by marital strife. So they created Juno. Juno's identity wasn't defined by marriage to one particular god. It was defined by the institution of marriage itself. She became the divine protector of the Roman matron, the guardian of the home, and the sanctifier of legally contracted unions. She wasn't just a wife. She was the wife, the divine blueprint for every respectable Roman woman. Her great festival, the Matronalia, was a celebration of married women and motherhood. The Romans stripped away Hera's messy, personal drama and replaced it with a clear, state-sanctioned social function. Juno wasn't a jealous goddess. She was the divine guarantor of family values, the celestial foundation of the Roman household, which in turn was the foundation of the Roman state. It was a brilliant and chillingly effective corporate rebranding. But no goddess underwent a more significant change in her portfolio than Athena. In Greece, Athena was formidable. The goddess of wisdom, yes, but also of courage, inspiration, civilization, law, justice, and crucially strategic warfare. She was a warrior goddess, born fully armed from the head of Zeus. The city of Athens was named for her, and its grandest temple, the Parthenon, was a monument to her as a victorious, martial protector. If Zeus was the CEO, Athena was the brilliant, indispensable head of strategy, the one who won wars not through brute force but through superior intellect. But when Rome acquired this divine corporation, they looked at Athena's resume and saw a redundancy, a major one. Rome already had a god of war, a very popular, very Roman god of war, Mars. They didn't need another one, especially a female deity whose methods, strategy, and cunning were perhaps seen as less direct, less Roman than the sheer overwhelming force that Mars represented. So Athena became Minerva, and in the process she was effectively demoted. Her martial responsibilities were stripped away and handed over exclusively to Mars. What was left? Minerva became a much quieter, more domestic goddess. She retained her patronage of wisdom, but also of crafts, poetry, medicine, and commerce. She was the goddess of weavers, sculptors, and schoolchildren. She was brilliant, but her brilliance was now channeled into less threatening, non-military pursuits. While the Greeks built the Parthenon for their warrior goddess, one of Minerva's most important temples in Rome was on the Aventine Hill, the center of the city's artisan guilds. The warrior who protected all of Athens became the patron of a trade union. It was a classic corporate restructuring. A powerful executive was sidelined, her key responsibilities reassigned, and she was given a new title that sounded important but kept her far away from the real power of military command. And then there was Aphrodite, a force of nature. In Greece, she was the embodiment of a terrifying primal power. Born from the sea foam and the severed genitals of the sky god Uranus, she represented love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation in their most raw and untamable forms. She was desire itself, chaotic, amoral, and irresistible. She drove mortals and gods to madness, started wars, and toppled kingdoms, all with a glance. She was cosmic chaos in a beautiful package. Rome saw this raw power and didn't just contain it, they nationalized it. They took this unpredictable force of nature and put it to work for the state. Aphrodite became Venus, and Venus was given the most important job in Roman mythology. She became the mother of the entire Roman people. Through her mortal son, the Trojan hero Aeneas, who fled the ruins of Troy to eventually found the Roman race in Italy, Venus became the divine ancestor of Rome itself. She wasn't just a goddess of love, she was Venus Genetrix, the mother of the race. This was a political masterstroke. Suddenly, the chaotic goddess of desire was the ultimate symbol of patriotic duty and destiny. Her love wasn't just a personal passion, it was the generative force that created Rome. This was exploited to its fullest extent by politicians. The Julian clan, most famously Julius Caesar and his heir Augustus, claimed direct biological descent from Venus. They built lavish temples to her not just as a goddess, but as their personal divine great-great-great-grandmother. It was the ultimate political trump card. How can you argue with an emperor who can trace his lineage back to the goddess of love herself? Rome took the most dangerous, unpredictable Greek goddess and turned her into a political tool, a symbol of dynastic legitimacy and national pride. The transformations weren't always so dramatic. Sometimes it was a subtle but significant shift in focus, a realignment with Roman social structures. Take Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt, the wilderness, wild animals, and chastity. She was a fierce, independent deity who lived far from civilization, a protector of the untamed world, and famously unforgiving to any mortals who crossed her. Her Roman equivalent Diana kept most of this portfolio. She was still the goddess of the hunt and the moon, but the Romans brought her out of the wild forest and gave her a distinctly urban social role. Her most famous temple in Rome stood on the Aventine Hill, a district heavily associated with the plebeians, Rome's lower class. Diana became a special protector of the common people, and even of slaves. While the Greek Artemis was a remote, aristocratic figure, Roman Diana was a goddess for the masses. She was also invoked as a protector of women in childbirth, tying her into the Roman cycle of family and civic duty. Her wildness was tamed, not by stripping her of her power, but by giving that power a specific social address within the complex class system of Rome. Finally, perhaps no goddess illustrates the Roman obsession with practicality better than the one who controlled the food supply. The Greek Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, agriculture, and fertility, but she was defined by one of the most profound and emotional myths in all of Greek literature, the story of her daughter Persephone's abduction by Hades. Her grief caused the seasons to change, and her story was the basis for the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the most important and secret religious rites of the ancient world, promising initiates a better afterlife. In Rome she became Ceres, and Ceres was first and foremost about grain. The name itself is the root of our word cereal. The deep, emotional myth of the lost daughter, while known to the Romans, was heavily downplayed. The focus was entirely on her function. Ceres was the divine administrator of the grain harvest, a role of immense political importance in a city that depended on massive grain shipments to feed its ever-growing population. She was directly associated with the Annona, the state-subsidized grain distribution that kept the Roman populace from rioting. She wasn't the star of some profound mystery cult, she was the divine guarantor of the food supply, the supernatural CEO of logistics. From Juno, the enforcer of family values, to Minerva, the demilitarized intellectual, to Venus, the politicized national mother, the Roman goddesses were remade in Rome's own image. They became less about myth and more about function, less about personal passions and more about public responsibilities. Rome didn't just copy the Greek gods, they optimized them for a society built on order, law, and pragmatism. They built a pantheon that looked like Olympus but ran like the Roman Senate. But what happens when this perfectly engineered system of belief, this divine corporation, finally faces a challenge it can't absorb, a faith it can't rebrand? What happens when the gods of Rome face the god of a new, unstoppable religion? The answer was a faith born not in a grand temple in Rome or a sun-drenched grove in Athens, but in a dusty, rebellious corner of the empire. It was an idea so radical, so fundamentally incompatible with the Roman way, that it couldn't be bought, merged, or rebranded. It had to conquer or be destroyed. This new faith, Christianity, didn't just introduce a new god. It declared war on all the others. The Roman religious system was a brilliant spiritual marketplace. It was built on the principle of yes, and. You believe in Jupiter? Great. You also want to worship the Egyptian goddess Isis? Welcome aboard. You have a local Celtic deity for your village? We'll build a temple for it and maybe even find its Roman equivalent. The entire structure was designed for addition, for inclusion, for a constantly expanding portfolio of divine power. It was a polytheistic buffet, and the state encouraged everyone to fill their plates. Christianity walked into this buffet and flipped the table over. Its central message was not yes and, but no only. There is only one God. All other gods, Jupiter, Apollo, Mars, Isis, all of them were not just inferior. They were false. They were idols, demons, deceptions. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a theological demolition. For a Roman, this was incomprehensible. It was like a new merchant coming to the forum and not just claiming his goods were better, but insisting that all other merchants were criminals who must be shut down. This refusal to participate in the state-sanctioned religious system was seen as more than just strange. It was seen as treasonous. The Romans called the Christians atheists, because from their perspective, anyone who denied the existence of the entire pantheon was an atheist. The stability of the empire rested on a principle called the Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. The idea was simple. If you honor the gods with the proper rituals and sacrifices, they will, in turn, bless Rome with prosperity, victory, and stability. By refusing to sacrifice, not just to Jupiter but to the divine spirit of the emperor himself, Christians were seen as actively sabotaging the state. They were breaking the contract between mortals and the divine, and in doing so, they were inviting disaster upon everyone. It was a matter of national security. This is the true root of the great persecutions. It wasn't just religious intolerance. It was the state's immune system, attacking what it perceived as a dangerous antisocial pathogen that threatened the very foundations of Roman civilization. Yet, the more the state pushed, the stronger the new faith grew. It offered things the old gods couldn't. It promised a personal relationship with a single loving God. It offered a clear moral code and the promise of eternal life and salvation, not just for the rich and powerful, but for everyone, slaves, women, the poor. While the worship of Jupiter was transactional, a matter of public ritual, Christianity was transformational, a matter of interfaith and community. It built networks of charity and support that were far more tangible to the common person than a state-sponsored festival. For nearly 3 centuries, this battle raged. Rome threw everything it had at this new faith, but it only seemed to thrive on martyrdom. The blood of the martyrs, as the saying went, was the seed of the church. And then the unthinkable happened. The ultimate plot twist in the history of the Western world. The Roman state didn't just stop fighting. It switched sides. In the year 312, the Emperor Constantine, on the eve of a battle that would decide the fate of the empire, is said to have seen a vision in the sky, a cross of light, and with it, a promise of victory. He had the Christian symbol painted on his soldiers' shields. He won the battle, and everything changed. Whether Constantine's conversion was a profound spiritual awakening, a stroke of brilliant political genius, or a bit of both, the result was the same. The machinery of the Roman Empire, which had spent centuries trying to crush Christianity, now slowly began to work in its favor. The persecutions ended. Confiscated church property was returned. Clergy were given the same tax exemptions as pagan priests. The faith that was once a capital crime became the favored religion of the emperor. The old gods were stunned into silence. Their temples, once the center of public life, began to empty. The momentum had shifted, and the collapse was shockingly swift. Within a single lifetime, the situation was completely reversed. In the late 4th century, Emperor Theodosius finished the job. He issued a series of decrees that effectively outlawed paganism. Public sacrifices were banned. Temples were closed, their treasures seized. The eternal flame of Vesta in the heart of Rome, which had burned for over 1,000 years, was extinguished. The oracle at Delphi fell silent. The Olympic Games, a religious festival in honor of Zeus for 12 centuries, were held for the last time. The divine corporation of Rome was officially bankrupt. The gods who had stolen the identities of their Greek predecessors had now had their own identities erased. Jupiter, the thundering king of the gods, was reduced to a myth. Mars, the glorious god of war, became a mere planet in the night sky. Venus, the embodiment of love and beauty, was now just a story. The system of absorption had finally been consumed by the one thing it could not absorb. But is that really the end of the story? Did the old gods truly die? Or did the Roman habit of rebranding, of syncretism, prove so powerful that it survived even the death of its own religion? Look closely, and you'll see the ghosts of the old gods everywhere. When the church wanted to win over the pagans, it often employed a familiar Roman tactic. It absorbed and rebranded their traditions. The birth of Jesus came to be celebrated on December 25th, right around the time of the Roman festival of Saturnalia and, more importantly, the festival of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, whose birthday was a major imperial holiday. A festival of light in the darkest time of year was simply too powerful a symbol to discard. The old polytheistic impulse, the need for many divine helpers, didn't just vanish. It re-emerged in the veneration of saints. Suddenly, there were patron saints for cities, for professions, for illnesses, the exact same roles the minor gods of the Roman pantheon had once filled. If your ship was caught in a storm, you no longer prayed to Neptune, you prayed to Saint Nicholas. The job description was the same. Only the name on the divine office door had changed. In some places, the transfer was so direct it's almost comical. The pantheon in Rome, the temple built to all the gods, was eventually saved from ruin by being consecrated as a Christian church, dedicated to Saint Mary and the martyrs. The temple to all gods became a church to the one God. The ultimate irony is that the Roman system of cultural appropriation was so successful, so deeply ingrained, that it left its DNA on the very thing that destroyed it. The story of Roman religion isn't a simple replacement of one belief system with another. It's a story of relentless adaptation. The Romans took Greek gods and made them Roman, and when their time was over, the world that followed took Roman traditions, Roman holidays, Roman concepts of organization, and even Roman building sites, and repurposed them for a new faith. The names of the gods may have faded from our prayers, but they remain etched into our culture, our language, our calendar, and the very sky above our heads. The story of how Roman gods stole the identity of Greek gods isn't just about ancient history. It's a timeless lesson in how power, culture, and belief are never truly destroyed. They are simply conquered, rebranded, and absorbed into the next great story. And that is a strategy more enduring than bronze, and more powerful than any god.